We're on a tour of an artisanal mine, which is at the very bottom of the supply chain when it comes to mining cobalt.
It was dangerous work and required scaling the tops of trees where the valuable vines hung.
Nous avons connu les ironies, les insultes, les coups que nous devions subir matin, midi et soir.
Trucks from the industrial mine next door dump hundreds of tons of leftover dirt. Adults and children from the village rush up these hills to fill sacks with debris.
If he was sent out with 10 cartridges, he had to have 10 hands of his victims. It's proof that he hadn't wasted his bullets.
Nous avons besoin aussi des investisseurs. Hein? Nous, en tant que Congolais, nous acceptons les étrangers venir travailler ici chez nous. Mais dès qu'ils viennent chez nous ici, ils n'arrivent pas à nous respecter comme il se doit et commencent à nous faire travailler comme des esclaves.
The device you're watching this on may well be powered by Congolese materials.
Parce que nous étions des nègres. Qui oubliera qu'à un noir, on disait tu, non certes comme à un ami, mais parce que les voix honorables étaient réservées pour ceux blancs.
Nous vous le disons, tout cela est désormais fini.
This is an iPhone. Once considered the most luxury of luxury products, now it's rare to see anyone without this or a machine of equivalent computing power outside of the most poverty-stricken areas. Now, it's no secret that Apple has a history of using some less than ethical methods to construct their devices. You might recall, for example, the horrific conditions at the Foxconn factory in China, where many of Apple's consumer electronics, including their phones, were being built, and how the conditions in this factory were so bad that the fate of Apple's employees in Foxconn was a horror story in and of itself. A few years have passed since the stories about Foxconn broke, however, and Apple rarely gets a mention in the news these days, barring the occasional promo piece for the next phone that is only different from its previous model in the sense that it costs $300 more. But what would you say if I were to tell you that not only did the conditions involved in the making of these devices that have become essential to modern society, not improve, but that they were facilitating slavery and genocide? Does that sound extreme? Well, there's a reason for that. But first, let's back up a little bit.
This is cobalt.
C'est l'échantillon du cobalt. Et nous a prouvé cet échantillon du cobalt peut nous faire combien à la pétrolière pour passer à la paiement des exploitants miniers.
This is cobalt, one of the most sought-after metals in the world. And as we transition from a world fueled on oil and gas into one powered by renewable energy, a resource that's going to be the subject of geopolitical conflict worldwide, or should I say, already is, the West's plundering of West Asia for its oil reserves is a well-established fact at this point. In the decades since the feeble lies behind the so-called war on terror fell apart under the slightest scrutiny. And while we absolutely need to move towards renewable energy sources to have even a chance at a future on this planet, the same people that put thousands in the ground for a chance at cheap oil have already made sure that the natural resources we need for battery technology will not be fairly traded for, with a well-compensated workforce and the potential for countries that have suffered for centuries from the plundering of foreign empires to finally get a chance to increase their standard of living and give a renewed sense of hope to their region, as this transition would allow in a just world. These resources will instead be plundered by the richest countries on Earth from the poorest. And the citizens of the countries that have the misfortune to be sitting on massive cobalt reserves, or lithium reserves in the case of others, will be made to pay with their freedom and their very lives for standing in the way of profits. And it just so happens that over 50% and possibly up to 70% of the world's cobalt is mined and produced in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Just as Nigeria has oil, and South Africa has diamonds, the DRC has cobalt. African countries with extensive reserves of precious raw materials often find themselves prey to irresponsible leadership and the greed of Western powers. The DRC, with the largest reserve of cobalt in the world, is no exception. As of October 2023, 6.9 million Congolese people have been displaced due to violence and rebel attacks. Some of that displacement, about 400 households in October 2023, has been directly linked to forced evictions driven by cobalt mining. Mining in the DRC has particularly gained attention, albeit insufficient, due to its association with grave human rights abuses and exploitation, along with the fierce international competition that leeches off it. The DRC produces more than 60% of the world's supply of cobalt, which is mined in the country's copper belt. Of the 255,000 Congolese mining cobalt, at least 40,000 of them are children. Much of the work is informal small-scale mining, where labourers primarily use their hands and earn less than $2 a day. According to American non-governmental organisation World Vision, mined minerals are often hazardous, and exposure to some can have profound health effects. There is also constant risk of falling into open mine shafts, being trapped or injured by collapsing tunnels, or drowning while mining underwater. In a survey, World Vision also found that 19% of miners have witnessed a child die at a mining site, 67% reported frequent or persistent coughing, and several girls had genital infections after working waist-deep in acidic water. In addition, up to 2,000 people die from cobalt mining accidents in the DRC every year. Miners also face SA and forced evictions. So, how did we get here? How did one of the most resource-rich areas of the world end up in a trap made by the great powers? Its paradise of a land turned into killing fields by corporations, from Chinese mine owners to companies who see the final products of the suffering from every day. Tesla, Dell, Microsoft, Google, and of course, Apple. To trace the roots of this horrific situation, we're going to have to take a brief tour through the history of the region, of the beautiful and the rich lands of the Congo River Basin. A story of slavery, colonialism, crimes against humanity, and how the West, when faced with the prospect of a liberated Congo, ensured that the horrors of the past would mirror the horrors of the present, destroying the very hopes of a nation with the West's two favourite playthings: business and bullets. Very ominous time for my key light to run out of power. But before we get into this horror story of a tale, let me introduce myself, as there will be no appropriate time to do so at all in this video. I am fierce opponent of the ravages of Belgian colonialism, Brigit Empire. Although since I am currently the science and culture correspondent for fake and gay British newspaper and sycophantic imperial rag, the Daily Telegraph, I should clarify that the British Empire really fucking bad too. This dress, this is a parody. I'm making fun of it. Some comments not seem to have got that. That's the whole point. Anyway, we've talked about the British Empire's crimes before, and we will again if you want to get depressed by the actions of my own native land. For now, though, we're talking about how Belgium, then America and Belgium, and then the entire capitalist world pillaged one of the most beautiful places on Earth to line the pockets of those already swimming in riches.
In June 1960, the Republic of Congo, modern-day Democratic Republic of the Congo, celebrated its independence from Belgium with King Baudouin of Belgium in attendance. During his address, King Baudouin expressed admiration for King Leopold II, despite the fact that Leopold's rule resulted in the deaths of over 10 million Congolese people.
Belgium got into the colonialism game very late, after being ruled over by multiple different masters, from France to the Netherlands, before becoming independent in the 1830s and appointing as its king a man from a line of German dukes, Leopold I. His son, Leopold II, has gone down in history as one of the most brutal butchers in human history. As part of a horrific slave colony, he pitched to the nobility and bourgeoisie of Europe as a humanitarian and business venture. The private venture we now know as the Congo Free State. Back then, as is the case today, the pursuit of profit and social progress by those half a world away from Africa was paid in Congolese blood. Leopold II sold his ventures in the Congo, given how late he was into this endeavour, as a philanthropic mission. Though, in private, he was already resolved to plunder the land and sell the profits of his pillages back to Belgium, to mimic the crimes the other great empires of Europe were already a century into committing elsewhere. Leopold dreamed of shipping huge steamboats up the Congo, full to the brim with ivory, from which a whole litany of luxury goods were made. To this end, he received huge loans from Americans and Europeans alike, and with the blessing of practically the entire ruling class of the Western world, he embarked on a mission to make himself rich. When the venture was over, the Congo would have fully half as many people as before he began his civilizing mission. And though Apple computers would not be founded for another century, corporations would reap the benefits of this bloodbath nonetheless. In 1890, Dunlop first began making rubber tires, beginning a global rubber boom, and allowing for the dawn of the automobile industry. Leopold could not have asked for a more fortuitous development. And while today the rising necessity of consumer electronics and the batteries necessary to move away from fossil fuels is one of the big drivers of suffering in the Congo, the birth of a world dominated by cars and the potential to create the world we see today, with its myriad of highways and individually owned vehicles, would devastate one of the naturally richest and most beautiful regions of the entire world. From King Leopold's Ghost by Adam Hochschild. For Leopold, the rubber boom was a godsend. He had gone dangerously into debt with his Congo investments, but he now saw that the return would be more lucrative than he had ever imagined. The world did not lose its desire for ivory, but by the late 1890s, wild rubber had far surpassed it as the main source of revenue from the Congo. His fortune assured, the king eagerly grilled functionaries returning from the Congo about rubber harvests. He devoured a constant stream of telegrams and reports from the territory, marking them up in the margins and passing them on to aides for action. His letters from this period are filled with numbers, commodity prices from world markets, interest rates on loans, quantities of rifles to be shipped to the Congo, tons of rubber to be shipped to Europe, and the exact dimensions of the triumphal arch in Brussels he was planning to build with his newfound profits. Reading the king's correspondence is like reading the letters of a CEO of a corporation that has just developed a profitable new product and is racing to take advantage of it before competitors can get their assembly lines going. The competition Leopold worried about was from cultivated rubber, which comes not from a vine, but from a tree. Rubber trees, however, require much care and some years before they grow large enough to be tapped. The king voraciously demanded ever greater quantities of wild rubber from the Congo, because he knew the price would drop once plantations of rubber trees in Latin America and Asia reached maturity. This did indeed happen. But by then, the Congo had a wild rubber boom nearly 2 decades long. During that time, the search knew no bounds. And its cruelty knew no bounds either. Rubber vines are not easy things to harvest. To get the rubber out of the tree, you had to climb a tree to a vine that could reach sometimes 100 feet in the air or higher, and people would climb quite far up, for reasons that are about to become very apparent, especially since the quota system meant all vines within reach of the ground were long gone by the time most arrived. So you would get up there, slash the vine you were looking for, and collect the sap with a bucket, often in swampland, and then to dry the sap, you had to spread the sap across your own body, and as you might imagine, pulling that off can be quite painful. So, because the natives refused to do it for all of the above reasons, they were coerced. Their villages were sacked, their food and livestock stolen, and their women, children, and elderly taken hostage until the required amount of rubber was delivered and the capital was sold back to the village. Males who resisted would watch as Leopold's men murdered their wives. SA among abductees was incredibly commonplace, and it gets darker still. Those who failed to meet the quota would be slaughtered, and their hands cut off and returned to the state as evidence of the number of dead. Shepard had stumbled on one of the most grisly aspects of Leopold's rubber system. Like the hostage-taking, the severing of hands was deliberate policy, as even high officials would later admit. During my time in the Congo, I was the first commissioner of the Equator District, recalled Charles Lemaire after his retirement. As soon as it was a question of rubber, I wrote to the government, to gather rubber in the district, one must cut off hands, noses, and ears. If a village refused to submit to the rubber regime, state or company troops or their allies sometimes shot everyone in sight so that nearby villagers would get the message. But on such occasions, some European officers were mistrustful. For each cartridge issued to their soldiers, they demanded proof that the bullet had been used to kill someone, not wasted in hunting, or worse yet, saved for possible use in a mutiny. Their standard proof was the right hand from a corpse, or occasionally not from a corpse. Sometimes, said one officer to a missionary, soldiers shot a cartridge at an animal in hunting, then they cut off a hand from a living man. In some military units, there was even a keeper of the hands. His job was the smoking. Shepherd was not the first foreign witness to see severed hands in the Congo, nor would he be the last. But the articles he wrote for missionary magazines about his grisly find were reprinted and quoted wildly, both in Europe and the United States. And it is partly due to him that people overseas began to associate the Congo with severed hands. A half dozen years after Shepherd's stark discovery, while attacking the expensive public works Leopold was building with his Congo profits, the socialist leader, Emile van der Velde, would speak in the Belgian parliament of monumental arches, which one will someday call the arches of the severed hands. William Shepherd's outspokenness would eventually bring down the wrath of the authorities, and one day van der Velde, an attorney, would find himself defending Shepherd in a Congo courtroom. As the rubber terror spread throughout the rainforest, it branded people with memories that remained raw for the rest of their lives. A Catholic priest who recorded oral histories half a century later quotes a man, to Swambe, speaking of a particularly hated state official named Leon Fivez, who terrorized a district along the river 300 miles north of Stanley Pool. All of the blacks saw this man as the devil of the equator. From all the bodies killed in the field, you had to cut off the hands. He wanted to see the number of hands cut off by each soldier, who had to bring them in baskets. A village which refused to provide rubber would be completely swept clean. As a young man, I saw Fivez's soldier Malili, then guard in the village of Bayeka, take a big net, put 10 arrested natives in it, attach big stones to the net, and make it tumble into the river. Rubber caused these torments. That's why we no longer want to hear its name spoken. Soldiers made young men kill their own mothers and sisters. A force public officer who passed through Fivez's post in 1894 quotes Fievez self, describing what he did when the surrounding villages failed to supply his troops with the fish and manioc he demanded. I made war against them. One example was enough. 100 heads cut off, and there have been plenty of supplies at the station ever since. My goal is ultimately humanitarian. I killed 100 people, but that allowed 500 others to live. With humanitarian ground rules that included cutting off hands and heads, sadists like Fievez had a field day. The station chief at Mabima used his revolver to shoot holes in Africans' earlobes. Raoul de Primorel, an agent working along the Kasai River, enjoyed giving large doses of castor oil to people he considered malingerers. When villagers, in a desperate attempt to meet the weight quota, turned in rubber mixed with dirt or pebbles to Albert Detiege, he made them eat it. When two porters failed to use a designated latrine, a district commissioner, Jean Vedersen, ordered them paraded in front of the troops, their faces rubbed with excrement. As news of the white man's soldiers and their baskets of severed hands spread through the Congo, a myth gained credence with Africans that was a curious reversal of the white obsession with black cannibalism. The cans of corned beef seen in white men's houses, it was said, did not contain meat from the animal shown on the label. They contained chopped up hands. Today, if you were in Belgium, you will see echoes of these atrocities, dressed up as sweet treats. Just as those forced into slavery had hands cut off, they failed to meet the rubber quotas for Leopold's insatiable desire for profit. Today, chocolate hands are a signature treat. Even today, Belgian luxury is associated, if only symbolically, with the maiming of Africans. But it's not just through symbolism by which Belgium and its allies have continued to haunt the Congo. Every attempt at freedom for the Congo, from Leopold's reign of terror to the modern day, has been quashed by capitalist interests. Because freedom for the Congolese people would inevitably lead to a reduction in profits. And if you know anything about capitalism, you know profits can only ever be allowed to increase. And it was with this in mind that the Cold War came to the Congo. And Belgium and the CIA conspired together to murder one of the most important revolutionary figures in African history, if not the history of the entire world, Patrice Lumumba.
Au nom du gouvernement congolais, à vous tous, mes amis, qui avez lutté sans relâche à nos côtés, je vous demande de faire de ce 30 juillet 1960 une date illustre que vous garderez ineffaçablement gravée dans vos cœurs, une date dont vous enseignerez avec fierté la signification à vos enfants, pour que ceux-ci, à leur tour, fassent connaître à leurs fils et à leurs petits-fils l'histoire glorieuse de notre lutte pour la liberté.
Returning again to King Leopold's ghost, we find ourselves at the emergence of Congolese independence, upon the results of the first democratic election in the country, and at least for several decades after, its last. You see, the people of the Congo elected a man who wasn't happy for the Congo to remain a servant of European imperialism, forever fated to be exploited for the gains of the West. And as many of you know, if you know anything about 20th century history, when a world leader decides he's going to try and make his people's lives better instead of just overseeing their exploitation, Uncle Sam draws his gun.
The Belgians, backed by England and France, sought to eliminate its charismatic prime minister, Patrice Lumumba. Eisenhower and CIA Director Allen Dulles favored the European nation in this colonial conflict.
Eisenhower gave the go-ahead to have Lumumba assassinated. 48 hours before Kennedy takes the oath of office, Lumumba is delivered into the hands of his enemies. He's taken out and shot in the head.
King Baudouin of Belgium arrived in Leopoldville to grant, officially and patronizingly, the Congo its freedom. He said, "It is now up to you, gentlemen, to show that you are worthy of our confidence." An angry, impromptu speech in reply by Patrice Lumumba caught the world's attention. Barely a month earlier, an election had made Lumumba a coalition government prime minister. It was the first democratic national election the territory had ever had. In substance, if not form, it would be, for more than 4 decades, the last. Lumumba believed that political independence was not enough to free Africa from its colonial past. The continent must also cease to be an economic colony of Europe. His speeches set off immediate alarm signals in Western capitals. Belgian, British, and American corporations by now had vast investments in the Congo, which was rich in copper, cobalt, diamonds, gold, tin, manganese, and zinc. An inspired orator whose voice was rapidly carrying beyond his country's borders, Lumumba was a mercurial and charismatic figure. His message, Western governments feared, was contagious. Moreover, he could not be bought. Finding no sympathy in the West, he asked for help from the Soviet Union. Anathema to American and European capital, he became a leader whose days were numbered. Less than 2 months after being named the Congo's first democratically chosen prime minister, the US National Security Council Subcommittee on Covert Operations, which included CIA Director Allen Dulles, authorized his assassination. Richard Bissell, CIA operations chief at the time, later said, "The president, Dwight D. Eisenhower, regarded Lumumba as I did, and a lot of other people did, as a mad dog. And he wanted the problem dealt with." In a key meeting, another official who was there recalled, "Eisenhower clearly told CIA Chief Dulles that Lumumba should be eliminated." Alternatives for dealing with the problem were considered, among them poison, a supply of which was sent to the CIA station chief in Leopoldville, a high-powered rifle, and freelance hitmen. But it proved hard to get close enough to Lumumba to use these, so instead, The CIA and Belgians still working in the Congo's army and police supported anti-Lumumba factions in the Congo government, confident that they would do the job. After being arrested and repeatedly beaten, the Prime Minister was secretly shot in Elizabethville in January 1961. Covertly urged on by their own government, a Belgian pilot flew the plane that took him there, and a Belgian officer commanded the firing squad. 2 Belgians then cut up his body and dissolved it in acid to leave no martyr's grave. We cannot know whether, had he survived, Lumumba would have stayed true to the hopes he embodied for so many people in Africa. But the United States and Belgium saw to it that he never had a chance. The key figure in the Congolese forces that arranged Lumumba's murder was a young man named Joseph Désiré Mobutu, then Chief of Staff of the Army and a former NCO in the old colonial Force Publique. Early on, the Western powers had spotted Mobutu as someone who would look out for their interests. He had received cash payments from the local CIA man and Western military attaches while Lumumba's murder was being planned. Wearing dark glasses and his general's uniform with gold braid and a sword, he later met President Kennedy at the White House in 1963. Kennedy gave him an airplane for his personal use. With the United States' encouragement, Mobutu staged a coup in 1965 that made him the country's dictator. And in that position, he remained for more than 30 years. Today, the Congo is 2 separate nations, the Republic of Congo and the Democratic Republic of Congo. And when people talk about the current horrors, they're largely talking about the DRC. And if you haven't heard about the exploitation happening there, you're not alone. People don't like to think about the blood that's spilt to grease the wheels of production. Least of all, the people that sit in editorial boards for newspapers and television stations, who have a vested interest in making sure you remain passive consumers, unwilling or even unable to question where the cobalt that makes your phone, your luxury goods, your electric car possible comes from. And whether there isn't, in fact, a way to share these resources without the cost being mass death, which there is, and which the companies making a tidy profit from slave labour in the DRC would really rather didn't bring up. After all, wage labour costs money. But eventually, as with Leopold's reign of terror, as with the assassination of Lumumba, the truth is beginning to out. And once we know this is happening, we have a duty to make sure that we demand it ends. But how did these conditions come to pass in the first place? Well, the ongoing genocide in the DRC is largely a spillover from the Rwandan genocide in the 1990s, and as a result of the West backing of the now more stable Rwandan state, as a proxy for the interests of countries like, for example, Belgium and the USA, at the expense of the people of the DRC. During the Rwandan genocide, the Congo was a refuge for those fleeing the violence. As a result, Rwanda, in both 1996 and 1998, invaded the Congo, and the situation on the ground, for the people in the region, became an echo of the conditions during the rubber boom, coming as it did as a result of the demands of those very same countries, corporations, and interests that had devastated them throughout their history. Neighbouring countries, particularly Rwanda, according to the UN, are behind the violence. The biggest rebel group, M23, was created by Rwanda and Uganda, and is financed primarily by Rwanda. China and Western countries, particularly the United States, Belgium and France, are also implicated in the exploitation of Congo's resources. Besides creating the conditions for its instability, they have also, as Amnesty International reports, failed to ensure that they are respecting international human rights in their global operations, including in their supply chains. Some neighbouring countries are out to control its mining zones. For China and the West, the point is to maintain cheaper production prices for electronics. Congo is rich in natural resources: rubber, timber, oil, gas, gold, diamonds, copper, lithium, coltan and cobalt. 63% of the world's cobalt production comes from the DRC alone. The latter 3 minerals are essential to produce electronics. China and the West, with Canada, Australia, the United Kingdom, and the US leading, are the biggest buyers of these minerals for electronics, with several mining companies in the country. China owns and controls around 70 to 80% of the mines in the DRC. in December 2019, attorneys for a Washington, D.C. law firm sued Apple, Google, Dell, Microsoft, and Tesla for their involvement in the injuries or deaths of child minors in a landmark case. Francis Lomami, a human and civic rights advocate from the DRC, lecturer in political science and international relations at the Université Libre de Kinshasa, and a former expert in international cooperation in the Congolese Foreign Affairs Department, explains that the current conflict stems back to the First Congo War in 1996, dubbed the First African World War. After the Rwandan genocide, when 1 million members of the Hutu tribe fled into the Congo after the Tutsis took power, Rwanda invaded Congo, arguing they needed to destroy Hutu militias. In 1998, they invaded again, and several countries, with a mixture of vested interests, Uganda, Zimbabwe, Chad, Sudan, and Namibia among them, came to fight in Congo. This resulted in the deaths of at least 250,000 people. To fund these wars, Congolese leaders sold mine sites to foreigners. We like to think of horrific historical events like the Rwandan genocide as having a defined beginning and end, a point where the atrocities began and a point where stability returned to the region and all the lessons were, or were not in this case, learned. But that's just not how the world works in practice. Events as huge and devastating as those of Rwanda and its subsequent invasions of the Congo in the 90s leave their mark, and the horrors that comprise them do not necessarily stop just because the country that committed them has found itself on more stable footing. The events of World War II did not cease to have an impact after 1945. You need only look to Poland to figure that out, or the partition of Germany. Hell, the Nazi defeat in World War II led directly to the Cold War, with the USA taking on a rebuilt Japan and West Germany as essential partners, with active agents of the very regimes they were fighting put into positions of power. Germany wouldn't be one country again until the 90s. History is not a clean set of linear events, where one chapter ends and another begins. 6 million people have died over 30 years and 3 wars, essentially one ongoing conflict in the Congo. Much like in Rwanda, many of the victims of the genocide in the Congo are Tutsis, in retaliation for warmongering for Rwanda's actions, though the Hutus are too victims in this conflict. This is all happening in the backdrop of a civil war, and one of the main fronts of this war is the fight for control of the cobalt mines, which provide cobalt and other rare minerals to the West and to China. The conditions in these mines are unspeakably cruel. It's easy, I fear, to look at this and feel hopeless. These horrific events are often hard to even do anything about, and while they are far away, when we have video of the things happening there, far away can feel very close. And it is. We should be helping. We should be spreading word. We should be taking action if we can. With these horrors, though, when so many happen at once, it's easy to become cynical, nihilistic, even despondent, as if all of this cruelty is inevitable. And I'm happy to tell you that that's just not true. Exploitation is not necessary. Exploitation is a factor in capitalism. If the conditions in the cobalt mines in the DRC teach you anything, besides that you should be fighting to free everyone wherever they live, be it Congo, be it Palestine, be it Sudan, it's that green capitalism will not save us. When millions of us march for action on climate change, the answer of our governments and their corporate partners is to find a way to exploit and abuse their way into developing green technology while making profit from the slavery and slaughter they enable in the name of the future. That's if they do anything at all. Learn this lesson from history. Our car-centric world did not need Leopold's crimes against humanity to birth it. It was already being born, and Leopold sought to ride that wave on a sea of blood. This shouldn't need saying, but slavery is not necessary for a green transition. We can pay workers fairly. We can use machines to do dangerous work where possible. Countries with the materials necessary to save the world from devastating climate change should not be picked apart for scraps. They should be full and equal partners, not colonies in all but name, but given real autonomy, leverage, and the ability to bargain for a world which they too deserve to live in. Our survival need not come at the cost of another's demise. And the only reason it looks like it does is because capitalism necessitates cutting corners, necessitates violence to bring costs down, to pay as little as possible and sell for as much as possible. And at a certain point, to force people to work below what they can possibly accept, it will use violence. Whether this results in piles of dismembered hands or people crushed and poisoned in mines, these are the same mechanisms at work. We cannot end these atrocities, we cannot transition to a green world acting in the spirit of Leopold, of Apple, of the current order. In this, as with many things, Patrice Lumumba was right, and it is in his spirit that we must act. I'd like to leave him with the last word on this. Until next time, thanks for watching. Free Congo.
Proclamé aujourd'hui dans l'entente avec la Belgique, pays ami avec qui nous traitons d'égal à égal. Ni les Congolais d'un de ces noms ne pourra jamais oublier cependant que c'est par la lutte qu'elle a été conquise. Une lutte de tous les jours, une lutte ardente et idéaliste, une lutte dans laquelle nous n'avons mélangé ni nos forces, ni nos privations, ni nos souffrances, ni notre sang. Cette lutte qui fit des larmes, des feux et des sangs, nous en sommes fiers jusqu'au plus profond de nous-mêmes, car ce fut une lutte noble et juste, une lutte indispensable pour mettre fin à l'humiliant esclavage qui nous était imposé par la force. Ce qui fit notre sort à 80 ans du régime colonialiste, nos blessures sont trop fraîches et trop douloureuses encore pour que nous puissions les chasser de notre mémoire. Quand nous avons connu le travail harassant, exigé en échange de salaires qui ne nous permettaient ni de manger à notre faim, ni de nous vêtir ou nous loger décemment, ni d'élever nos enfants comme des êtres chers. Hommage aux combattants de la liberté nationale. Vive l'indépendance et l'unité africaine. Vive les Congo indépendants et souverains.
Hi, now to wildly switch tone from extremely important and depressing to begging for your money and approval. You can give me all of that by liking, commenting, subscribing, joining my Patreon or YouTube membership, giving me money on Coffee or PayPal, and telling me that I did good. Thank you for listening. This is important, and it will probably be demonetized because I talked about a lot of stuff that you're not supposed to talk about on YouTube. So please give a donation to me if you have the means and have not already supported helping people in the DRC, which should be the message. I'll drop a link to somewhere you can donate in the description and pin a comment, I think. But after you've done that, if you have like £1 to give, after you've given like 25 or whatever to DRC, I'd appreciate it. This was what I originally actually made this channel to do, to critique empire. Obviously the British Empire was the first thing, but like I can't not talk about the Congo. I'll be sitting on this for ages because I need to release it in a month where I've made a bunch because it will not make me any money. Thankfully the Pink News video did pretty well, so we're doing this. Thank you for letting me do this, and yeah, fuck empires. That's the point. That was the point of the channel initially. If you hadn't worked out from the Winston Churchill video I made way back, maybe I should remake that one. Let me know if I should remake the Winston Churchill video. I feel like I could do a better job now, and like a bigger one. Yeah. with better stuff. Okay. Anyway, if you join my Patreon or like YouTube members, either one of those, that'll do. You can get access to the members only Discord. We have a nice little community there. Get my Nintendo Switch friend code, possibly my Steam friend code if I get on that, which I should. And exclusive content, such as long-form interviews with people like Princess Weeks, Rosenkreutz, and Jesse Gender. And then you can also get your name read out at the end of each video, just like Basedfinger, Madeline Aguirre, Ben Murphy, Lex Phoenix, Enter Kozitz, Janelle, Mira D, Jade Senior, Boa Ear, James W, Marvin Dorr, Tamsin, Bob the Builder 5445554, Deborah Laboon, Vegas, Zilazthenium, Vince Whitaker, Amelia Unchained, Sarah, Jason Haig, Frank McManus, Susan Foster, Helena Real, Sierra Whiskey, Orestria, Alicat Girl, John N, Scully, Jan, Lloyd Luciente, Jason Cribbett, Shield Baden, Robin Podolsky, Casual Observer, Manta Ray, Courtney Burmack, Sleepy Slug, Philip Tabrocca, Soma Piglet, Brain Douche, Artie Wolf, Greg Noble, Deanna McMillan, Caroline Reglado, Alexandra Lilly, Howard Lott, Nerania, Scarjan, and Joey Cobalt. I should say this every time. Some of you have really, really fun names to say. I appreciate that. Like, get more people. People should have more names that are fun to say. I mean, I'm not recommending you name your child like Bob the Builder 5445554, but it does sound good on the tongue, you know. Anyway, all right, Free Congo. Bye bye.